Hope everyone's having a good week. It is the Thursday before Christmas, December 23rd, and we are headed down once again to Camp Edinburgh, Indiana, just south of Indianapolis, to deliver this time 14 pallets of freight. And we're trying to wrap up a big project that we've had going on for a couple of months down there before the end of the year. We got, I think, one more delivery after today, maybe another 12, 13 pallets, and that'll be it. And so it's a beautiful December morning, temp in the upper 20s, and we might actually see some sunlight today. Although, as you can see, it's got that typical cloudiness and gloominess that you get in the Midwest for somewhere between 6 and 8 months every year. We're driving today in our 2011 Silverado 3500 with the 6.6 liter Duramax diesel. It's the LML series diesel, which came out in 2011. So this truck was in the first year that they made that engine, again 2011. It's got 4-wheel drive, crew cab, LTZ trim, and for a 10-year-old truck, it's been replaced twice now. First in 2015, and then again in 2020. So you might say it's 2 generations outdated, but to be honest, the interior still looks just fine. The exterior looks perfectly respectable. It doesn't look outdated or junky or old or tacky or crappy, the way a lot of older General Motors products do from 10, 15, 20 years ago. It's actually aged very, very well as far as we're concerned. Now, it doesn't have the most modern features like your touch screen and your CarPlay and all those things, but to be honest, and you'll be shocked to hear this, but you can actually live without that stuff. You can actually live with a vehicle that has actual switches and buttons that control its features, instead of having everything buried in a touchscreen underneath 3 or 4 different menu screens that you got to flip through. Just to control the temperature on your climate control, or to switch songs on your stereo. It still works perfectly fine. You might say it's basic and utilitarian, and that's not an insult as far as we're concerned. But no, it's held up very well. We've had this truck for just about a year. We bought it in November of 2020 in Missouri, just outside Columbia, and its previous owner was actually a business which sold boats at the Lake of the Ozarks in the Branson, Missouri area. And so it had spent its entire life going back and forth from central Missouri to the Atlanta area to pick up boats. And it had about 360,000 highway miles, mostly highway miles. We did a very detailed inspection. It had not been off-road. It had not had a ton of use and abuse and wear and tear. It was clean. And not the kind of clean where it's been detailed and they got rid of most of the dirt and junk that was on it. You could actually see in all the nooks and crannies, and no, it had not been off-roaded and anything of that nature. It didn't have a gooseneck hitch, and in our opinion, that's a good thing, because if it's got a gooseneck on it, that means it's been doing heavy towing for a good portion of its life. And then you got issues with the drivetrain essentially being all used up. And so it did not have a gooseneck hitch on it. Although with the bumper pull hitch, the standard receiver, it's a class 5. It's a 2.5-inch receiver. And so you could tow, I think with this truck, it's upwards of 15,000 pounds, believe it or not. So, in any case, again, after a year of owning it, here's what we think. It does the job. It's a very solid, very dependable truck. You don't fall in love with it the way you do a Cummins, and we've talked about that before. A Cummins becomes a part of your life, and the Duramax It's just something you use to get a job done, and you end up with a tremendous amount of respect for it, for the work it can do, for the way it does the job. But again, it doesn't become your soulmate, and you shouldn't. If you're the kind of person who needs a vehicle to be your soulmate, no, this is not going to be it. Maybe you should get a dog, or maybe, find a significant other, something like that. Somebody else who completes you, because it's not going to be your truck if you've got a Duramax. The reason we bought it is because our other heavy duty pickup is a 2003 Dodge 3500, back when they still called it a Dodge and not a Ram. It's got the 5.9 Cummins. It's a 3500 with the single rear wheel, not the dually, and two-wheel drive, quad cab, not a crew cab, and a long bed. And we got it in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. We got it when it was 10 years old in 2013. It had 286,000 miles on it. Now it's got about 400, just over 400,000. So in about 8 years, we put about 120K. And some years, obviously, a lot more than others. But that was a great truck in a lot of ways. We used it primarily to tow our 16-foot bumper pull travel trailer. And that trailer was perfectly fine. It had, I think, a 7,900-pound GVW. We could load it full of about 8 pallets of freight. And the Dodge had no trouble pulling an 8,000-pound bumper pull trailer in most circumstances. However, once you got into the mountains, and we've done that before, we've taken it through the Appalachians probably 10, 15, 20 times, and we've taken it through the Rockies out and back once. And once you get into long duration towing in what you might call severe inclines, a 7% grade for 20 miles up or down, that truck starts to reach its limitations. When it came out in 2003, it was state of the art, but in the year 2020, 2021, time has marched on, and what you realize is that you need a truck that can control a trailer going downhill without having to ride the brakes the entire way. You need a truck with an exhaust brake, and a factory exhaust brake, and that truck did not have one. The 5.9 in the year 2003, it was the first year they had the Common Rail fuel injection system with the Bosch CP4. It was not the P-pumped version or anything like that. It was a 24 valve, which they'd had for a couple of years, going back to, I think, 98 and a half. So it was 5 years into the 24 valve drivetrain. And if people don't know it, it's a 24 valve straight six, but it does not have an overhead cam. It still has the cam essentially a couple inches above the crankshaft, and it uses push rods to operate the drivetrain. And that might have been the first engine, that at least that we can recall, that is push rod operated, that has 4 valves per cylinder. So that's pretty impressive as far as we're concerned. But again, a great engine in a lot of ways, a fantastic engine in a great many ways. But it was a little bit short on power, and that didn't concern us too much. The thing that concerned us was the fact that it didn't have an exhaust brake. And so as a result, when you're going down steep mountain descents, it started to cook the brakes, and it did not give you any kind of a feeling of control or security, because you had to ride the service brakes. And then when you had a trailer with trailer brakes, that meant you were riding the trailer brakes. And if you did that long enough and hard enough, you would start to fade them out, and they'd start to get cooked, and you'd wind up in a very, very bad state, bad condition. And so that was our first problem with the Dodge. The second problem with the Dodge was that we got our trailer, the one we have now, which you'll be able to see here in a second. It's a 48-foot Exus, all aluminum, enclosed. Well, you can't really see it. But it's a car hauler, and we have repurposed it as a freight hauler. It can hold about 20 pallets of freight, standard commercial freight, 40 by 48 inch pallets. And we figured out how to load it with a forklift, even though it's got a ramp in the back. But we do deliveries of that size on a pretty frequent basis for our military contracts all over the country. And in a lot of cases, we're happy to send them out on an 18-wheeler. But in some cases, no, we need to take it ourselves. For instance, today we're going 5 hours each way. That's a 10-hour round trip. That's very easy to do in one day from Michigan down to Indianapolis. No reason to, spend a couple $1,000 or whatever the going rate might be to put it on an 18-wheeler when we can easily do it ourselves. Especially because it's going onto a military base, and a lot of freight companies won't deliver onto military bases. And it's the time of year, mid-late December, when you're paying astronomical rates for commercial freight. In addition, because of all these supply chain issues that you keep hearing about, the rates in general have gone way, way up, and the transit times have gone through the roof. We sent out a truckload to Fort Pickett, Virginia, middle of November, so just over a month ago, and that was 15 pallets. It was a little bit heavier than this truck and trailer would comfortably have been able to manage. Comfortably and legally, I should say. And so we sent it out on YRC, I think, and it took 12 days to get there. No, actually more than 2 weeks. It took about 16 to 18 days to make about an 8 to 10 hour transit. And then in another case, we sent a delivery out to El Paso for the Border Patrol, and it had complex, a lot of parts. It had about 40 different line items, and some of it was, custom-made barrels for sniper rifles, and it was a lot of custom-made equipment for them. And we sent it out on Roadrunner freight, and lo and behold, it arrived, and one or two of the pallets were missing, and one or two of the pallets that did arrive had been tampered with, and somebody had busted into them and either pilfered some of the goodies out of that shipment, or it had been lost, as they say. And we actually escalated all the way to the CEO of Roadrunner Freight. He got us on the phone with his corporate head of security. They did a very detailed investigation, and at the end of weeks and weeks of searching all their terminals and all their trucks and sworn statements with their drivers, nothing turned up. And so as a result, we had to spend another 3 or 4 months having replacement items built for all the stuff that had been lost, stolen, pilfered, whatever the case may be. And so, long story short, our results have been pretty mixed with commercial freight. And so, when it's a sensitive delivery, when it has to be there quickly to meet deadlines for contracts, or when you just don't want to spend thousands and thousands of dollars more than you need to, yeah, we take it ourselves. And so that's why we got that trailer. And the Dodge was capable of hauling it. You had to be very, very careful not to max out the rear axle, which was again a non-dually rear axle. And with a non-dually, I think the max load on that rear axle was something like 6,150. And it is very, very easy to load your trailer and truck to where you max out a 6,150 pound rear axle. And so that became a problem. The other problem is that even when you're under the weight limit, which we always were, you could tell it was kind of not happy to be loaded down that heavy. It kind of started to squirm a little bit, not to an unsafe extent, but it just did not feel comfortable. And the weight of the pin weight of the gooseneck trailer, and the fact that it wasn't a dually, so it had a kind of a narrow stance, it just made it feel a little bit squirmy, and that's the only way we can describe it. To where you knew you just didn't want to wind up having to make too many emergency maneuvers with it, emergency lane changes, that kind of thing, because it might not end well. And then the third reason is, we talked about downhill, we talked about the load on the rear axle. The third reason, we realized that the Dodge wasn't going to work for us long term if we were going to be doing heavy towing, was on the uphill. The 5.9 Cummins of that year, 2003, it was not the high output, it was a standard output. And again, it was a perfectly fine engine. It had something like 235 horsepower. Again, this is the standard output 5.9. 400 some pounds of torque, pound-feet of torque. That wasn't the issue. The issue was the transmission. The standard output Cummins is hooked up to a 47RE transmission, not the 48RE, and not the 68 RFE, which they switched to in 2007.5 when they went to the 6.7 liter. And definitely not the ASIN, which they went to in, 2015? There's some Cummins expert out there who knows exactly which years Dodge used which transmissions. It didn't like to go up steep hills with heavy trailers. It didn't have manual gear shifting. It had one button, which was the overdrive on-off, which is essentially a tow haul button, tow haul switch. And then it had the, you could shift it down one range to low. And I think that locked it into second gear, if I'm not mistaken. So you couldn't manually downshift from fourth to third. And the overdrive on off, that was okay. But the problem was, what you wound up doing is going into steep hills. You'd have to build up a ton of speed at the bottom and go into a steep hill climb at like 70 miles an hour and just hope you could keep that momentum going. And it didn't slow down to like the upper 60s, and then 65, and then 62 and 63. Because if it did, all of a sudden it would downshift very violently from fourth, I think, all the way down to, maybe down to third. And again, it just wasn't in a good, it wasn't in a good state. It was exceptionally unhappy towing anywhere near its max trailer weight up a steep incline. Again, a steep incline for us, on the highway, that's around a 6 or 8% incline for extended durations. And this happened a couple times that we can remember pretty vividly. Going through, we went out west once on Interstate 10, and we left Atlanta, went down 65 through Montgomery, down to like Mobile or wherever it is, where 65 ends. And then we picked up I-10 going west, went all the way through Louisiana, including Lake Charles, which had just been hit by a hurricane, just been absolutely devastated by a hurricane. This was October of 2020. Through Houston, San Antonio, all that. And then out through New Mexico, Arizona. And when we got to Tucson, we made a delivery there. And then we shot up to Phoenix, and then I-17 towards like Prescott and Flagstaff, and on I-17, which has a lot of steep climbs and descents, that Dodge was a very unhappy camper. And there was some white knuckle driving going up and down those mountains on I-17 through like central Arizona. I mean, the scenery was beautiful, but the Dodge again had reached its limits. And so that's when we knew we had to step up to something else, something newer, or more capable, I should say. Now we've still got that Dodge, and again, we love it to death. In so many ways, it's kind of the last of a dying breed, in the sense that it's a Cummins with no EGR, with no DPF, and no SCR system, meaning no DEF system. And so that's kind of neat. In terms of the simplicity, in terms of the lack of maintenance that you have to do on it, the Dodges, when they brought in the DPF and the SCR system, or at least the DPF around 2007.5, when they went to a 6.7. They had some trouble making that adjustment. And so the 5.9 Cummins, again, it's the common rail system with the CP4. Absolutely tremendous. It runs all day, runs like a freight train, as long as you keep it inside its limits. As long as you don't start running up and down the mountains with big heavy trailers. If you do that, we absolutely love that truck to death. But even towing an 8,000 pound trailer, let alone 10, 15, 18,000 pounds, it just, I'm not going to say it becomes treacherous, it's just not happy doing that. So we looked at what to get next, and what we settled on was this guy here, again, the 2011 LML Duramax, dually with the crew cab. And the main reasons, the extra power. This thing has 397 horsepower, and so it has no trouble getting up and down steep mountains. It's got the 6-speed Allison 1000, an absolutely magnificent transmission in every way. It has no trouble shifting up and down through the range, locking, unlocking the torque converter. You just don't even notice it doing its job. It just works great. The engine and transmission working together. The tow haul mode, which we have engaged right now, the check engine light is basically always on, and the tow haul mode is that other orange light. That doesn't necessarily lock out the upper gears. It's in sixth gear right now, and I guarantee the torque converter is locked up. But it does adjust the shift points. And when you turn on the exhaust brake, which we have engaged basically all the time when we're towing, it controls your downhill descents beautifully, and you are basically never on the brakes going downhill, even with a heavy trailer. Today we're loaded up to 25,700 pounds, and it has absolutely no trouble slowing us down, controlling our speed. Even slowing down for an off-ramp just to get off the highway. You never ever feel like the truck's trying to get away from you and it's a runaway truck. Or it gives you that runaway train type feeling. no, it's fully controlled. It downshifts almost as soon as you let off the gas. And if you're going on a downhill slope, you can just feel those veins in the turbo closing up, constricting the flow of the exhaust in order to generate massive back pressure and make the engine essentially do compression braking to slow it down. And everything works fantastic. Now, TFL Truck, if you watch their videos, they did a big comparison between, I want to say, the 2021 or 2020 Duramax and the same year Cummins. And a lot of people say it, that the exhaust brake on the Cummins, at least the one from the last, call it the last 3 or 4 years, is the best in the industry by far, and it will control a 35,000 pound trailer, no problem, downhill in the Rockies. And either the LML or the L5P exhaust brake doesn't even hold a candle to it. And I can't speak to what the Cummins does, or the L5P, but the LML exhaust brake has never let us down and never made us think, God, we wish it was working harder. So in those two respects, additional power for uphill towing and additional stability and control and braking in the downhill, those are the two main advantages of this truck over our previous one. And then, as discussed, it's a dually, and so not only does it have a superior axle rating, GAWR, for that drive axle, it's got an 8,000 pound rating, which is a lot harder to max out, although we still come close very often. But it's got a wider stance. You know, the rear wheels of the truck are spaced out there at, you know, I don't know, 96 inches, 102 inches in terms of the track. And so that does a much better job in terms of stability and not giving you that feeling that it's squirming around back there, getting pushed around. A few other things. It's got an independent front end, just like our Dodge does. And after owning another Dodge with a solid axle front end, we just don't like a truck with a solid axle front end. The steering feels completely disconnected. And you know, you just get a feeling almost that you're like, it's almost like steer-by-wire. It's almost like you're phoning in the steering instructions, and then the truck is kind of sort of taking its time deciding what it wants to do. And there's tons and tons of slop. Unlike this, where when you start to turn the wheel, you feel turning effort happening in the front wheels. In a solid axle truck, no, you can. I mean, it's got like 3 or 4 or 5 inches of slop. And that detracts from your confidence tremendously. It's got the crew cab again. Compared to the quad cab, that's just extra room in the back for either people, if you carry passengers, which we do every now and then, or extra stuff that you don't want to put in the bed of the truck or in your trailer. The rear seat folds completely up and out of the way, and there's nothing underneath it, so it's a completely flat load floor, unlike in our Dodge, which has that little tray under there for holding your, you know, your tow straps or your chains or whatever, your tools. And that's nice to have, but sometimes you don't need that, and sometimes you just need as much floor space as possible. And so again, the Dodge does not have that. This truck does. And so for all those reasons, we knew this is what we had to get. Oh, and it's got 4-wheel drive, which our Dodge did not. And so the combination of 4-wheel drive and an independent front end is basically non-existent in any other heavy-duty truck other than the Silverado. And so there it is. And so after a year of owning it and using it basically to its limit, here's what we can tell you. The first thing is that it does everything we've ever asked it to. It performs at the limit. With no drama and no issues and no squirreliness. And no problems, really. When you fully load the truck to its max GVW of 13,000 pounds, it still accelerates, it still slows down, it still goes where you point it. It doesn't start bouncing and porpoising and, doing all that stuff that a truck does that completely kills your confidence in it and makes you think it's about to drop dead on you. They set the limits appropriately, and again, it operates just great within its limits. We haven't exceeded the limits because we just don't do that kind of thing. But at its absolute limit of 13,000 pounds GVW, it's not squatting. The headlights aren't. It doesn't look like it's got the Carolina squat going on. The headlights aren't pointing up into the sky. It's still level. And so in that respect, we just don't have any complaints. It performs as advertised. It accelerates perfectly fine. With the trailer, again, loaded to 25,700 pounds between the truck and trailer. So a 13,000 pound truck with 13,000 pounds on the trailer axle. Which is in reality about an 8,000 pound truck with an 18,000 pound trailer. Or an 8,500 pound truck with a 17,500 pound trailer. Whatever the case may be. Braking, accelerating, your temps are never, you never see the engine temperature start to skyrocket. You never see the transmission temperature start to skyrocket. Everything performs as advertised. And so that's really all we can say about it. It does what you ask it to do. We've thought about upgrading to something newer and stronger, but to be honest, there's really no reason to at this point. A lot of people have said a lot of great things about the L5P, which is the next generation Duramax that came out in 2017. It's got more horsepower, more torque. You're up from 397 horsepower, 765 pound-feet of torque, up to 445 horsepower, 910 pound-feet of torque. To be honest, we don't need extra power and torque. That's not a limiting factor in anything we need to do right now. The 2020, which kept the same power levels, basically the same internals on the engine, but it added a lot more cooling in the form of a bigger radiator, gigantic radiator fan. I think they redid the oil cooler, if I'm not mistaken. I think they did a lot of things on the outside of it, but they kept the internals the way they are, and kept the power and torque rating where they are. But they increased the towing. I think the max trailer went from 22 or 23,000 pounds all the way up to 35,000 pounds because of the extra cooling and probably the extra braking too that they added to it. They also made the front end absolutely hideous to where it is now the worst looking full-size pickup probably ever made, that 2020 Silverado. And again, it's a lot more capable, but to be honest, we don't need a lot more capability. All we need to do is what this truck does for us, which is let us load it up to about just under 26K and get down the road hundreds or thousands of miles in comfort and confidence and safety. We've also, been reading and hearing a little bit about the Cummins, because, if you watch videos from a guy called Tow Piglet, he's a hotshot trucker, and he keeps talking about the best truck for hotshotting, and I think he's got two Cummins trucks, and he's got a Power Stroke. And he goes out of his way to say that he doesn't have a Silverado or a Duramax and never will, because partly because their tow rating is lower, and partly because on the newer ones with the higher tow rating, well, you got that 10-speed Allison, and he doesn't trust it, and a lot of other people don't either. The 6-speed Allison, everybody trusts. It is a universally respected and admired transmission. The 10-speed, who knows how long that thing's going to last. And so it's only a year old at this point. It came out 2020, or maybe a little bit sooner. That might have come out a little bit sooner. But the verdict is still out, in terms of the complexity. What he recommends is a Ram, specifically with the 6.7 Cummins that does not have the CP4. And so we're talking 2015 to 2018. They went to a CP4 in 2019 when they redesigned the entire truck. And then they got away from the CP4 in 2021 once they started to see the disastrous results that it was creating for them. When the CP4 started to do to the Cummins what they did to the LML. And so again, his recommendation is 2015 to 2018 Ram with the non-CP4 Cummins and the ACID transmission, not the 68 RFE, which again, it's a Chrysler transmission. Some people say it's an old minivan transmission. I think its lineage might go back to minivans actually, and they just kept upgrading it, and no, it's severely limited in its durability and longevity. So that's what a lot of people say. No, you got to get the, get rid of the Duramax and get a Cummins, a 2015 to 18 Cummins with the ACID transmission. But to be honest, again, for what we do, we're not doing hotshot trucking. We don't need to load up to, that max trailer in the upper 20s or mid 30s in terms of thousands of pounds. All we need to do is tow the trailer we have right now. And, every now and then we max it out. But for the most part, the weight of the trailer is not the limitation on what we need to do. And if we needed to, sure, this truck can go to 30,000 pounds max combined GVW, 13 in the truck and 17 in the trailer. But we very rarely have a need to go above 26,000. Almost never. That's the truck everyone says you need to get. The Ram 2015 to 18 with the ACID. But again, for what we're trying to do, this truck is perfectly fine. And so as of now, we don't really have any plans to upgrade it. It needs maintenance, it needs tires, it's gonna need brakes eventually. We got an issue with the fuel gauge dying every now and then. The check engine light is on, and that's just because there's something, and as far as everybody who's ever looked at it can tell, it's either one of the two NOx sensors related to the SCR or DEF system, or it's something in the EGR. And in order to really properly get in there and dig in and figure it out, they think you're going to have to pull the cab off, and we just don't have any need to do that. And so that's it. After a year, we got essentially no complaints about this truck. It has done everything we asked it to in comfort and confidence and for what it's designed to do, it performs admirably, and we would recommend it very highly. But the one caveat that we always have to throw in, which is that you have to be willing to accept somewhere around a 3% risk, about 1 in 30, that you're going to be one of those people whose CP4 dies on them and takes out the entire fuel system and gives you a $10,000 repair bill. Or you could replace the CP4 with the CP3 and not have to worry about that. Other than that, we just don't have an issue with this truck, and don't feel any need to upgrade to something newer and stronger. The only thing that would make us want to upgrade is if somebody put Pro Power on board, meaning onboard AC generation capability, into a heavy duty, which nobody has right now. We got the F-150 with Pro Power on board, the high output Pro Power on board, and it works great. But nobody has put that into a heavy duty just yet. And if they do, we'll be the first ones lined up to buy it. And then the other thing is some type of a self-driving system. Either the Blue Cruise that GM has, or the Ford. Again, on the F-150, it's got lane keeping, lane centering, and adaptive cruise control. And we don't even need Blue Cruise or Super Cruise. I'm sorry, that's the GM version. We don't even need that, because we're never gonna be hands-free driving anytime soon. We're just not ready to trust our lives to a vehicle and hope that it does the right thing every second of the day when you're driving down the highway at 100 plus feet per second. Okay, well, I think that's it for now. Hope everyone's having a great day, and I hope you all have a great Christmas coming up here in a few days. Talk to you later.